Another blow for Rishi Sunak. Cabinet Minister Michael Gove stands down as an MP. One of the most prominent Tories in a generation, he served as Education Secretary, also on justice, the environment and levelling up, a leading Brexiteer who famously stabbed Boris Johnson in the back over the party leadership.
All the things that he did in terms of leading the Vote Leave campaign, which delivered Brexit, he will go down, I think, as one of Britain's best Conservative reformers.
He's the most high-profile name in a now mass exodus of Tory MPs from Parliament ahead of the election. After a pretty miserable start to his campaign, we'll assess where it leaves the PM tonight. Robert will join us. Also on News at 10.
You have given, in 750-odd pages, a craven, self-serving account, haven't you?
Stumped and silenced. Paula Venables rendered speechless on her final day at the Post Office inquiry.
Israel must immediately halt its military offence.
The UN's top court orders Israel to halt its action in Rafah, but Israel rejects the ruling. Deepfakes from beyond the grave as 1 billion Indians go to the polls. What lessons for other elections, including ours? And God's influencer, why this British-born teenager who died at 15 is to become the first millennial saint.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. It had already become clear well before the election was called this week that the makeup of Westminster's green benches was heading for a generational shake-up. More than 100 MPs, including a post-war record number of Conservatives, say they're leaving the Commons for good. And tonight, 2 more high-profile Tories joined the exodus. Michael Gove, the Housing Secretary, said it was time for a new generation to lead. Tonight, Rishi Sunak thanked him and admitted the government would be poorer without him. Also on her way, Health Minister and one-time leadership contender, Dame Andrea Leadsom. She too announced her resignation tonight. And so, the day when MPs made their valedictories to the House, it ends with a striking thought. Whatever the result on July the 4th, the Parliament, which sits from July the 9th, could well be scarcely recognisable.
At the start of a gruelling election campaign, tonight, one of the Prime Minister's most senior cabinet ministers is calling it a day. Michael Gove, an influential and at times divisive figure, has confirmed that he's stepping down. In a letter posted on social media, he wrote, "I have decided today not to seek to represent Surrey Heath at the forthcoming general election. This election comes almost 20 years after I was first adopted by this fantastic association as your candidate. The chance to serve is wonderful, but there comes a moment when you know that it is time to leave, that a new generation should lead." In the Commons this evening, as dozens of departing MPs gave their final speeches, there was praise for Mr Gove.
He has a significant legacy in terms of his work as Education Secretary. He wasn't always popular, but we now have significantly more good and outstanding schools in this country after 14 years of a Conservative government.
A journalist turned politician, Mr Gove was elected in 2005. He then rose up the ranks of the Conservative Party, most notably serving as Education Secretary under David Cameron, where he led a shake-up of the schooling system.
Just 3 weeks to go before the referendum.
He later became a leading figure of the pro-Brexit Vote Leave group during the 2016 referendum. And then he ran for party leader, a move regarded as a betrayal of his close ally Boris Johnson. Mr Gove's allies say his legacy and impact on policy is unparalleled.
I think he'll go down as one of Britain's best reformers, so particularly in education, where we're seeing those reforms having a real impact for people's futures, young people's futures. In the Environment Secretary, as Justice Secretary, all the things that he did in terms of leading the Vote Leave campaign, which delivered Brexit.
He has a majority of more than 18,000, but the Liberal Democrats say his blue wall seat is within their sights.
Well, clearly what we're seeing today is so many senior Conservatives are feeling the threat from the Liberal Democrats in their seats. Michael Gove in Surrey Heath. Earlier today we heard about John Redwood in Wokingham. We heard about Greg Clark in Tunbridge Wells. These are all seats that they risk losing to the Liberal Democrats at the general election.
More than 70 Tories will step down this election. But as one of the most high-profile departures, his exit will be keenly felt in Downing Street as the PM braces for the weeks ahead. Jasmine Cameron-Shaleshi, News at 10.
And Robert's here to talk us through this and what you know from behind the scenes, Robert.
So we heard that paean of praise from the Prime Minister, and I think that's what he felt he had to say. His private thoughts, I suspect, would be less printable. He only found out today that one of the great veterans of these Tory governments, one of the most senior of his ministers, had just made up his mind he'd had enough and was going. And actually, it's incredibly embarrassing for the Prime Minister to have had no advance warning, and for this to have, happened, at the start of a campaign that hasn't been going brilliantly, at all, really. And the big contrast is with Andrea Leadsom. People in the Tory party did know that she was thinking of going. Now, more problematic for the Prime Minister is I'm hearing that a number of other senior Tories are going to stand down over the weekend. There are already 150 Tory seats, or seats, not Tory seats. There are already 150 seats with no Tory candidates, about a quarter of the total, and that number is rising. They've got to appoint candidates by June the 7th at the absolute latest. It's an enormously tall order. There can't be any campaigning really of any note in those seats if they haven't got a candidate. And I think it just shows you, in a way, how unprepared the Prime Minister's party was for the Prime Minister, for the general election that he decided to call. They just weren't expecting it.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed for that. We'll stay with the general election campaign too. And after yesterday's mess up in a brewery, you might have thought the PM's team would be a little more judicious about his next stop. But today they chose Belfast's Titanic Quarter, and we needn't even spell out the reporters' questions, which inevitably followed. The Conservatives did, though, have the political nous to time today's policy announcements on energy, with confirmation from the regulator that average household bills will drop from July. Proof, Mr Sunak claims, that the Tories' plan is working. But Labour says the new price cap still leaves families £400 a year worse off. To cut bills for good, Sir Keir Starmer says, a new state-owned energy company is needed.
Keir Starmer launched Scottish Labour's campaign just hours after the news that the energy price cap would be coming down by 7% in July. A good moment then to remind everyone of his plan for a new energy provider.
Great British Energy, a publicly owned company investing in clean British power and based here in Scotland.
The flip side is that Labour want to move away from oil and gas more quickly than the Tories.
Can you guarantee that as you wind down oil and gas production, there will be no net loss of jobs in Scotland?
Yes, it's very important that we make that guarantee. We're not turning off the taps. Oil and gas will be with us for a very long time to come, but we need to manage that transition.
Labour want more jobs making these. The government has stopped building onshore wind farms. Labour would restart it. There are real policy differences on energy.
The centrepiece of Labour's energy offer is Great British Energy, a publicly owned renewables company based here in Scotland. Labour would issue no new oil and gas licences, but they would keep the energy price cap. The Conservatives, by contrast, would issue new oil and gas licences to smooth the transition to net zero. Today they said there would be a new deal for energy customers and they would keep the price cap throughout the next Parliament.
And the Tories say Great British Energy won't work.
I think it's a bit of a con. What do we actually know about this plan? They've set out £7 billion over the cost of a parliament. That's great, but industry are saying that actually their overall plans are going to deter hundreds of billions of pounds in investment.
As for the other parties, the SNP want to increase renewables and support oil and gas. The Lib Dems want more renewables and an emergency home insulation scheme, whilst the Greens are focused on households with
proper financial support for the people on the lowest incomes, combined with a nationwide programme to insulate people's homes in a way that will bring bills down whilst keeping homes warm.
An issue which isn't going away because although average energy bills will now drop to less than £1,600 just before the election, analysts think they may rise again just before the winter. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Glasgow.
There were more denials and more tears today from Paula Venables, the former post office boss, giving evidence at the Horizon inquiry for a third and final day. For the wronged sub-postmasters, though, her raw emotions paled into insignificance. One said that Miss Venables and the other post office executives would never cry so much as the victims and their families. But Miss Venables did make an admission of her own failings. "I let these people down," she said.
Sub-postmasters have waited years to see the former post office boss answer their questions. Will today be your toughest day, Paula? And today that moment came, as lawyers acting on their behalf got a turn to challenge Paula Venables.
There were so many forks in the road, but you always took the wrong path. You preach compassion, but you don't practice it. You have no one to blame but yourself. You still continue to live in a cloud of denial, and it persists even to today because you have given in 750 odd pages a craven self-serving account, haven't you? I didn't know, nobody told me, I can't remember, I wasn't shown this, I relied on the lawyers.
I have tried to do this to the very best of my ability. I have taken, as I hope the inquiry has seen, all of the questions I've been asked. I have answered them honestly, no matter how difficult or how embarrassing or how wrong I was at the time. I don't believe I could have worked harder for this.
You failed, didn't you? You failed to get into this on your account. You failed to ask the right questions. You couldn't be bothered, could you?
I loved the post office. I gave it... I worked as hard as I possibly could to deliver the best post office for the UK. What I failed to do is I did not recognise the imbalance of power between the institution and the individual, and I let these people down.
Lee Castleton was portrayed in the ITV post office drama. He was ordered to repay losses wrongly calculated by the faulty Horizon system.
I tried to tell the court.
He was eventually made bankrupt after the post office pursued him for legal costs.
You instigated no investigation into why £321,000 of public money was used to crush him and grind him into the dirt.
I agree with what you're saying.
For Lee, being ground into the dirt was exactly what that period of his life felt like.
I felt as though the whole thing was insurmountable. It was something that they were prepared to do anything, or in my opinion, to make sure that they made an example of me. Nobody should live through that fear of what the sort of government-owned businesses can do to you with absolutely unstoppable power.
In an email revealed by ITV News from 2013, Paula Venables said she found the sub-postmaster's stories very disturbing. But a year later, she told colleagues that while watching television coverage of the scandal, I was more bored than outraged.
I have no excuse for what I wrote, other than, as I say, I was under pressure, and I think I was relieved that the programme hadn't been perhaps as bad or as hard-hitting as I'd expected it to be. And I'm just hugely sorry.
Former sub-postmaster Joe Hamilton was sat in the front row of the inquiry today, as Venables' 2014 email was read out. The CEO said Miss Hamilton lacked passion in the TV report.
I'm deeply sorry that I was so rude to you in that email.
They have fought for decades to hear her say sorry, and she's apologised numerous times over the last 3 days. But Paula Venables' evidence will also be remembered for her poor recollection and apparent lack of knowledge about what was happening in her own company. Ellie Pitt, News at 10.
Well, the end of Paul Vennell's evidence coincided with the day the wrongful convictions were overturned for hundreds of postmasters, all part of the wash-up of this Parliament. Paul's here to talk us through that scenario and others. I mean, what a turn of events that those two situations have coincided.
Yeah, as Paul Vennell's was being grilled about what went wrong at the Post Office in Parliament, they were trying to put things right as best they can after decades of sub-postmasters going through hell. And in this rush to get things through before the election, an unprecedented bill quashing all of the convictions of sub-postmasters relating to the Horizon scandal has now passed, thankfully in time for that election, meaning the names of those sub-postmasters will be scrubbed from police records. Incredible to think that they still sit there on those police records, and they'll also be eligible for compensation automatically of £600,000. They can actually apply for more if they'd like to, but they have to go through a separate process for that. And there was also good news today for victims of one of the other great scandals of our age, the contaminated blood scandal. Their compensation package also managed to pass through Parliament just in time for the election. They will have to wait and see if the next government implements that compensation package nice and quickly for them.
And it's not just a matter of the wash-up for the legislation, but it's all the committee reports. There's a whole host of things going on that have to be tied up effectively. And one very pertinent to the reporting that you've delivered so effectively over the last couple of years, really, Paul, and that is about the culture in our fire services.
Yeah, and I think it says something that amid the frenzy today to get all these things signed off before the election, the Home Affairs Select Committee chose to champion their inquiry into fire service culture because they are so gravely concerned about it. They didn't have time, actually, to write a report before the election, but they have written to the Home Secretary tonight outlining their conclusions, and they conclude that the fire service is institutionally misogynistic, racist and homophobic. We've heard that several times during the evidence that they've been hearing over the past couple of months. They say the culture just hasn't been updated in 30 years, and in their words, it is lamentable. That certainly chimes with the experiences that we've been looking into across the country, starting in South Wales, but looking at lots of fire services in England too, where we found the sexual harassment of women, abuse of women, bullying of men and women. Tonight, the fire service sector's umbrella body, if you like, the National Fire Chiefs Council, says that it is making change. It has got an action plan in place, but the Home Affairs Select Committee thinks there's not enough being done to hold the service to account. They want a national review of fire services. They want more powers for the inspectorate. They want proper teeth from the fire authorities too.
OK, Paul, thank you for all of that. Thanks. To the war in Gaza now, as a top UN court today ordered Israel to halt its military offensive in the southern city of Rafah. More than 1 million people had been sheltering there, but IDF commanders ordered its evacuation as Israeli troops moved in. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is now described as disastrous by the International Court of Justice. But they stopped short of ordering a full ceasefire and have little power to enforce their rulings anyway.
What little is left of Rafah is now not only the target of Israel's aggression, but the focus of the world. As its assault on Gaza's second city has escalated, so too has international condemnation of Israel. Today, a judge at the world's highest court ordered it to stop its advance.
Under the Genocide Convention, Israel must immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part.
Rafah was meant to be a refuge for the people of Gaza. But the humanitarian situation there was described by the court today as disastrous and deteriorating fast. It's ordered Israel to open the Rafah crossing to allow desperately needed aid to get in. The case against Israel has been brought by South Africa, which accuses it of genocide, a claim Israel described today as false, outrageous and morally repugnant. But its politicians are under pressure at home as well to stop the war and do a deal that brings all the hostages back. Israeli Defence Forces confirmed today that they'd recovered the bodies of 3 more hostages during an overnight operation in Gaza. They were 59-year-old Michel Nissenbaum, 42-year-old Hanan Yablonka and 30-year-old Orion Hernandez. The body of Orion's partner, 22-year-old Shani Luke, was brought home to her family a week ago.
It's a relief, because we always thought maybe we'll never see her body again.
Her dad Nissim told me that he now counts himself as one of the lucky ones.
If I was the Prime Minister, I would do anything, first of all, to bring them out, back to Israel, to their families.
Israel claims its operation in Gaza is an act of self-defense and that it's done all it can to protect civilians. But as it pushed on with its offensive inside Rafah today, from outside it looked more isolated than at any time since this war began.
And Chloe joins us now from Tel Aviv tonight. And Chloe, what difference will this judgment from the court in The Hague make, do you think?
Well, Julie, Israel has already signalled that it intends to ignore today's ruling. The International Court of Justice doesn't actually have any specific powers to force Israel to comply, but it is the UN's top court, and when it speaks, the world tends to listen. Today's hearing is part of a wider case that's being brought by South Africa in which it accuses Israel of genocide. That is something Israel strongly denies, and that case is expected to take years to resolve itself. But today's hearing comes at the end of what has been, diplomatically at least, a very difficult week for Israel. On Monday, the International Criminal Court said that it was seeking an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu, something he described as absurd. We are waiting to hear how Israel's closest ally, the United States, will respond to today's development. But there is no doubt that Israel is under increasing international pressure from a watching world.
Chloe, thank you. A landslide overnight in Papua New Guinea buried villagers as they slept, with officials there fearing more than 100 people have died. Remote mountainside, hundreds of miles from the capital, collapsed at around 3 a.m. local time. Rescue efforts have been hampered, with roads blocked by boulders and fallen trees. Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister said he is sending heartfelt condolences to victims' families. Singapore Airlines has tightened its rules around seatbelts after a British man died and more than 100 others were injured in severe turbulence early this week. Some passengers and cabin crew were left with brain and spinal injuries when they were thrown around the cabin in Tuesday's horrifying ordeal. The airline has now introduced a more cautious approach during turbulence, suspending meal services and requiring all crew to buckle up. Now, it's a mark of how much the world has changed since the last election that artificial intelligence, hardly on the tip of anyone's tongue 5 years ago, is now considered a significant cyber threat. Specifically, the ease with which false information can be both generated and spread. It's prompted parliamentary authorities here to issue a rapid response document warning of the risks associated with the latest technology. Technology which, in India, in its vast election, is being harnessed to unnerving effects.
An endorsement from beyond the grave. This Indian politician died 6 years ago, but a digital deepfake of him is being used to try and influence the world's biggest election. AI words altered from another dead leader bidding to win over 1 billion votes. It's believed they were commissioned by political parties themselves, the equivalent of the Conservatives creating a digital Margaret Thatcher to endorse Rishi Sunak.
How easy is it to create something fake but realistic?
With just a single image, you just upload one single image, upload one target video, and you'll get a deepfake face-off video in just less than 3 minutes. If you look closely, you can find out that this is not a real video. But the issue in India is the confirmation bias. So people want to believe what they want to believe, actually.
India isn't alone. This fake endorsement, generated a decade after former President Suharto died, was viewed 5 million times in Indonesia's election, which begs the question, could we see something similar here?
AI is changing the world.
Home Secretary James Cleverly created this video to warn of AI's power.
Hang on, pause that.
That was not the real me.
Just yesterday, a parliamentary report flagged UK politicians being deep-faked.
I literally told you, didn't I?
Including Sir Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan.
Why don't they have Remembrance Weekend next weekend?
Both are complete fabrications.
I think in the next few weeks there is a real risk of us seeing what's been happening in India here in the UK. What we really need is for the people generating this content, and that may include political parties, to be able to label when they are using AI to generate material.
Currently, it relies on social media companies to take that material down. In India, they fear that can be too slow.
They just posted just the day before election to make the maximum impact so that when big platforms come into play, the content has already done its work.
Perhaps just as dangerous as believing what's fake is eroding trust in what's actually real. Martin Stew, News at 10.
Now, if you've been out for a quick tipple tonight and left the bar feeling somewhat short-changed, you may not be alone. A new survey has found that more than 2/3 of beers and wines served in UK pubs are short-measured. Trading standards say almost 30% of the drinks they tested had 5% less in them than had been paid for. And with the price of a pint being what it is these days, it all adds up. The average beer drinker loses £88 a year on missing measures. The American filmmaker Morgan Spurlock has died aged 53 from complications of cancer. He became famous for his 2004 documentary Super Size Me, in which he ate nothing but McDonald's every day for a month while recording the impact on his health. His family announced in a statement that he had died peacefully, surrounded by family and friends in New York. Finally, there aren't many church memorials depicting a teenager with a laptop, but then there aren't many digital natives being immortalised with sainthood. Now, though, a British-born tech-savvy teenager who died of leukemia at age 15 is to become the Catholic Church's first millennial saint. It's after the Pope attributed a second miracle to Carlo Acutis, whose online skills earned him the nickname God's Influencer.
From the moment he was born, Carlo Acutis was special. Caring for the poor and helping the homeless, he dedicated his young life to the Catholic Church. The tech-savvy teen even set up a website to spread the word of God.
We've put it here so that people can come and venerate it any time they want.
At this church in London, where he was born, there is now a shrine for Carlo, complete with laptop, for the boy who became known as God's influencer.
He used social media for promoting faith. So that's why our little shrine here has him holding a laptop with the Blessed Sacrament in the centre. That's the theme of it, that's the symbolism of it. So here we are. He created this website, and when you go into it, you access that which is the heart of the life of the Church.
The 15-year-old who moved to Italy as a baby died in 2006 from leukemia. In 2020, he was beatified by Pope Francis after he was credited with the miraculous recovery of a sick child. He's now been attributed to a second miracle and is set to become the Catholic Church's first millennial saint. He'd be only the second Briton to become canonised in nearly 50 years, after Cardinal John Henry Newman was made a saint last year. Other notable saints in modern times include Mother Teresa, who was canonised in 2016, and Joan of Arc, who became a saint in 1920. For young Catholics, it's a momentous moment.
It's amazing. We finally have someone that we can really look up to, and especially for us young people, to say that it's someone who has been brought up with the internet and with all these new technologies. It's a great example.
I think this is so important for young people nowadays, that they know that even if you are married to someone or you're a student, you can still be a saint. And this is not weird. This is actually a very cool thing to do.
The Vatican is yet to announce a date for his canonisation, but Carlo Acutis will always be known as the world's first millennial saint. Layla Hayes, News at 10.
And that's it for tonight. It has been quite the week, hasn't it? From all the team here, good night. Have a lovely bank holiday weekend.